Hi students, welcome back. This is lecture 2 for episodio 8 for week 2. Again, our objectives are going to be to talk about your interests, activities, and experiences, to conjugate verbs in the present tense with the Spanish verbs endings AR, ER, and IR, and to use expressions to show frequency and places where you do these activities. Okay, so I'm going to go over some quick vocabulary that I may or most likely will be using while I discuss conjugation of verbs, so it's really important for me to make sure that you understand this. So verb is verbo in Spanish, and verbs is verbos, so I will occasionally say verb or verbo, so just keep track of that. We discussed regular verbs last time. Regular verbs are verbs that follow the rules, verbo regular. And irregular verbs are verbs that do not follow the rules or do not always follow the rules. We also have the word infinitive or infinitive form. And sometimes I will call a verb an infinitive verb because this verb is not conjugated. So a way you can know this is because the Spanish verb will end in AR, ER, or IR. So that means the verb is not conjugated and it is in an infinitive form. We also have the subject pronouns. I believe you already studied this in Spanish 1. This is a person or a thing doing the action without using their names. So in English, we have I, you, he, she, it, they, we. And I put it in yellow because in Spanish, we have to use gender. So it's not a neutral verb. So yo, tú, él, ella, usted, nosotros, nosotras, ustedes, ellos y ellas. And a quick note is that the two L's in English sound like ya. So think of yellow, ya, ella, okay? We will be using the present tense, and sometimes I will say correct tense or something like that, and that's a tense basically means or shows time. So in Spanish for this class, we'll be using the present tense a lot. Okay. And then in Spanish, we really need to know the subject of the verb to use it in the conjugation correctly. And we also need to use certain patterns to conjugate the verb depending on the tense. So in Spanish, for this class, we'll be learning the present tense to conjugate the verbs, but we also need to know who is doing the action to conjugate the verb correctly. Okay, so here's some quick examples of how I would use this vocabulary. So look at this. Run every day in the evening. Do homework in the morning. Why are these verbs infinitives? So you can see them in English here and in Spanish here. One of the reasons why these verbs are infinitives is because I do not know who is doing the action. These are just kind of general statements, right? I don't know when this is happening. I don't know the tense. So these are infinitive verbs. If you see them in Spanish, correr, hacer, leer, trabajar, they're also infinitives. They have the AR, ER, and sometimes the IR endings. So that's how you know they're not conjugated. So if I actually went ahead and wrote some sentences with these words, you can see that now I know the subject and the verb. So these are conjugated. So I read the news every day. Who is doing the action? I am. What's the verb? Read. She works at Kendall twice a week. Who is doing the action? She is. What is the verb? Works. And why are these verbs conjugated? Well, we know who is doing the action. And if you look at this, we know when the action's happening. We know the tense. So that's how you know if verbs are conjugated or not. This is very similar in Spanish as well. Okay, so this would be a good time to pause the video and read page 173 and pay attention to the subjects doing the actions and the verb endings. You can also download this accompanying worksheet for this lecture. I found that a lot of students really like to just kind of do this by hand first and then go from there. If you don't want to download it or you don't want to have printed, you can just kind of draw this for yourself on your notebook. And we'll be working through this worksheet to help you out and make sure that you're going through the conjugation of the verbs correctly. So go ahead and pause the video and play when you're ready. Okay, so this is the conjugation of the AR verb. And this is an infinitive verb, trabajar, which means to work. So as I mentioned earlier, we need to know the subject, who is doing the action, for me to be able to conjugate the verb correctly. So trabajar has an AR ending, and you notice that these verbs are already conjugated and they do not have the AR ending. For example, yo trabajo, tú trabajas, usted, él, ella trabaja, nosotros, nosotras trabajamos, ustedes, ellos trabajan. Okay, so these endings have changed. When you do, when you're going to use another verb, so this is a pattern that these verbs would use for the AR ending. This is another infinitive verb, hablar, and we're going to go ahead and use this pattern and apply it to hablar. So here's how I would tackle this. I would use the stem of the verb that doesn't change, right? Notice that I just kind of fill it out here very quickly. And I'm going to apply these endings here. So go ahead, pause the video and complete them yourself on your worksheet. And when you're ready, go ahead and play to check your answers. Okay, so here are the answers. So notice that the verb endings are pretty much the same, right? And these are all correct. Yo hablo, tú hablas, usted, él, ella habla, nosotros, nosotras hablamos, usted, ellos hablan. And that's how you change the endings. That's how you change the endings or conjugate a verb that ends in AR. And remember that most of these are going to be regular verbs, so pretty much all the time they will use this pattern. Okay, so here is a conjugation of the ER verb. So again, we have the subject, we have the verb comer, which means to eat. It has an ER ending, and this is the pattern this verb is going to use. Yo como, tú comes, usted, él, ella come, nosotros, nosotras comemos, ustedes, ellos comen. Okay, so let's go ahead and work on the verb hacer, which means to do. And this is a really important verb in Spanish. You should memorize this one. Hacer. Okay, so here's how we tackle this again. And a quick note, verb hacer, el verbo hacer is irregular. So by irregular is that it not always follows the rules of conjugation or the pattern of conjugation. So hago is that irregular aspect of the verb. So yo hago, always, okay? After that, pretty much everything else is the same, follows the same pattern. It's just this yo form that is not following the regular rules. Okay, so go ahead, and I believe I've put this in your worksheet already, so go ahead and do the rest of the endings, and you can pause the video and we can check your answers when you're done. Okay, so this is the conjugated form of hacer. Yo hago, tú haces, usted, él, ella hace, nosotros, nosotras hacemos, ustedes, ellos hacen. And that's it. So again, some of these ER verbs will be irregular. I believe there's another one. There's a couple in the book in there. Okay. So now let's look at vivir. Okay. This means to live, and it's an IR verb. And I have my subject pronouns here. Yo vivo, tú vives, usted, él, ella vive, nosotros, nosotras vivimos, usted, ustedes y ellos viven. Okay, so we're going to use the verb escribir. Escribir means to write, and it has an IR ending. So again, I would just go ahead and, maybe write those down and then kind of really pay attention to the pattern here. Yo escribo, tú escribes, usted, él, ella escribe, Nosotros, nosotras escribimos, ustedes y ellos escriben. One quick note is you might have noticed already some of these patterns are very similar to the ER and the IR verbs. So like nosotros is kind of similar and the yo is kind of similar. So take a moment to kind of reflect and see what are some similarities and differences that you see. Okay, so now that you're able to conjugate verbs, the next big step would be to be able to make some statements using the verbs that you learn in vocabulary in conjugated forms. Okay, so both English and Spanish follow a similar sentence structure. We always have the subject and the verb. So the subject always comes first. I write, and then the verb, and then you kind of tell me extra information. This will be called the predicate. I just call it extra information because it kind of just tells me more about who and what the subject and the verb are doing. So, for example, I write emails every day. The Spanish is going to be very similar. Yo escribo, because we conjugated the verb to yo, emails todos los días. She eats lunch at Kendall twice a week. So ella, who is doing the action, come, because we changed comer to conjugate it for ella, and then el almuerzo en Kendall dos veces por semana. Okay, last one. I do my homework in the morning. And as I said, the verb do is very important. You really, really need to memorize that one. So yo, and then hago, to conjugate it to the yo hacer. Yo hago mi tarea en las mañanas. So you can make yourself a little chart like this and just come up with some sentences about your everyday life. And just make sure that your subject matches your conjugation of the verb. Okay, we're on the assignment. We're pretty much done with lecture 2. So go ahead and take a look at that worksheet that I uploaded for you. You don't have to download it, or you can if you want to. It'll be both in PDF and Microsoft Word, so you can type it in if you'd like. You can also just draw this on your notebook. Okay, and then remember the chart of activities you completed on the last lecture? Go ahead and take a look at it again. So you have a list of verbs and activities with some vocabulary. Now it's time to go ahead and take those verbs and conjugate them and use them. So go ahead and choose 8 activities. Conjugate your verbs, make a little table like the one that's on the worksheet, and write your sentences using the subject verb form. So write 8 sentences. Also, if you have time, look at page 424 and 425 of the textbook. These pages actually give you patterns and information for conjugation of the verbs, the things that I explained in this lecture, but also they have conjugation patterns for irregular verbs. So if you want to kind of look into this more deeply, go for it. And that's it. Thank you.